As pastors and ministry leaders, how do we respond when our ministry is moving more slowly than we anticipated? In this episode, I'm joined by Ronnie Martin. Ronnie is the founder and lead pastor of Substance Church in Ashland, Ohio. He also serves as the Director of Leader Renewal for the Harbor Network and has written a number of books, including his latest, Pastoring Small Towns. Together, Ronnie and I look at how we can be at peace with the pace that our ministry is developing in our local churches. Ronnie also shares the beauty that we experience when we refuse to overextend ourselves and instead slow down and journey alongside our people. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, friends, and welcome to another insightful episode of FrontStage BackStage. I'm your host, Jason Daye, and it's my privilege, my honor, each and every week to have the opportunity to sit down with a trusted ministry leader and really explore a topic, all in an effort to help you and pastors and ministry leaders just like you embrace a healthy rhythm for both life and ministry. We are proud to be a part of the Pastor Serve Network. And not only do we create a show for you every single week, but our team also creates a toolkit that complements this conversation that we're about to jump into. And in that toolkit, you'll find a ton of different resources, including a ministry leader's growth guide. And this is specifically designed for you to work through with some reflection questions and also to work through with the ministry leaders in your local church. Many churches use this in their weekly staff meetings. They listen or watch the episode, then they dive into these questions together. And it's just a great resource, and you can find that entire toolkit at pastorserve.org/network. So be sure to check that out. And then our team at Pastor Serve, we love pastors day in and day out. We walk alongside of pastors, encouraging, coaching, and just being a support for you. And if you would like to learn more about a complimentary coaching session with one of our trusted coaches, you can find information on that at pastorserve.org/free session. So be sure to check that out as well. Now, if you're joining us on YouTube, take a moment to give us a thumbs up. And in the comments below, if you would drop your name and the name of your church, we'd certainly appreciate that. Our team loves to get to know our audience better, and we will be praying for you and for your ministry. So go ahead and drop that in the comments below. And whether you are watching us on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast platform, please take a moment to follow or subscribe so that you do not miss out on any of these great conversations. And as I said, I'm excited about today's conversation. And at this time, I would like to welcome Ronnie Martin to the show. Ronnie, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, Ronnie, super excited for this topic that we're going to really dive into together here because we're exploring a topic that really, I think, is something that every single pastor, regardless of where they're pastoring, what the context might be, likely wrestle with this at some point. And that, Ronnie, is really being at peace in a way with the pace at which ministry in our local churches is growing or is developing. And although all of us probably wrestle with this to some degree, Ronnie, you approach this from your context as a pastor in a small town. And I'd love just to begin, if you can help us kind of frame this conversation. What do you mean? How do you define a small town?
Yeah, well, that's one of the $1 million questions, because I think it can be defined in some different ways. And I think, depending on how you want to frame it, how you want to look at it, right? There's lots of variations of small towns. So a small town could be something where you got 200 people, you got one gas station, and, you got a very small community that's existed in a place for many, many years, that's not grown very much, that's adjacent to a larger town or a village or a bigger city. And then you have mid-sized towns, which is probably where I'm at, where you got anywhere from 20 to 30,000 people. It's still it's sort of a community that exists unto itself, right? So it's self-contained, it's self-sustaining. Maybe it's an hour away from a larger city. And then you have all kinds of variations of that, like in between those two, kind of demographics that I laid out. My town is, like I said, about 25,000 people. It's a university town. It's about an hour away from Columbus or Cleveland. I'm in mid-Ohio. Donnie, my co-author, lives on a coastal town, which if you're there in the summer, there's a lot of people that are visiting the town. But during the year, there's probably only about 10,000 people, and it's right on the coast. And so it has all kind of the unique features that like a coastal town would have. But at the end of the day, it's still small. There's not a lot of people there, which again brings out sort of like a particular kind of culture that you won't find if you're in a suburban environment or an urban environment. So the smallness wherever you land within that is kind of what brings out, I would say, some of the unique some of the uniqueness of the culture, some of the challenges of the culture as well. So.
Yeah, that's great, Ronnie, and that kind of gives us a framework to think through, and probably a lot of pastors who are watching right now or listening are like, "Hey, my church kind of falls in there somewhere," because a lot of the churches across the country here in the U.S. specifically are in what would be kind of defined as a small town, and in a small town, Ronnie, there are some unique characteristics that just kind of come along with the idea of being a small town. Oftentimes when I think of a small town, I think of it has that sense of community within the town that you may not experience in a more urban environment or even a suburb, because in suburbs oftentimes people are running around different places, whereas a small town kind of has that tighter community type feel. Is that something that you find in small towns?
Yeah, I think that's something that you can probably draw out as being a commonality with most small towns. It would probably be a combination of community, family, and tradition. And so those are typically things that I think you can use to define a more small town, scenario. And those are the things that those also create some of the guiding principles that you see in small towns. And they're, because you have a tradition there that's been in place for many years. You have generations of families that have been in place for many years, and that has created a type of community then that kind of dictates what it is that then becomes the culture of that town. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's super helpful, Ronnie. Now, as we're looking specifically at this idea of being patient in our ministry, right? So which, as I said, I think probably every pastor, every ministry leader, regardless of the context, we all have this sort of this sense of urgency, right, Ronnie? Like, I mean, this is a big thing. We're talking about Jesus. There are eternal consequences to this. And so in our minds, oftentimes we're like, hey, let's go out there and get it. As we're preparing to launch into ministry, we have these great visions of saving the world in some sense, right? And so that's just kind of built into us. And yet, when we actually get out there and we're actually serving, we realize that everything doesn't just magically happen because of some great ministry idea we have and we went to put together. So, Ronnie, talk to us a little bit about this idea of you write about slowness in ministry and how there are advantages to that, as well as some challenges. So, talk to us a little bit about this idea of this pace.
Yeah, it's funny because there was a uniqueness to the ministry of Jesus in that he was never hurried. We don't really read a lot about him being very hurried, and yet he was only here for 3 years doing his ministry in the way that we read about it in the Gospels. And so our tendency, I think, in our flesh is to, as Zach Eswine, a pastor that wrote a book called The Imperfect Pastor wrote, he said, we have the tendency to want to do things famously fast instead of doing the slow, I'm butchering this quote, but doing the slow kind of maturing work over a long period of time where we can actually see the most fruit, right? And so I think we have an impulse, which is, I want to be able to measure what I'm doing, and to be able to measure what I'm doing, I want to do it in such a pace and in such a way that people will be able to look at me and say, hey, he's really a mover and a shaker. He's really getting things done. He's building something big, and he's doing it in a way that's tangible. He's doing it in a way that I can see it. And then, but a lot of mistakes are made, as we know, when we try to do anything faster than really the sort of the internal pace that God has given to us to do anything in life, right? And so, in a small town, especially, I think it can have disastrous results, because again, the nature of a small town, in general, not all the time, but I've found that there's a suspicion to things that go too fast too. So here I am, a Southern California transplant. If you know anything about Southern California culture, it's just not slow; it's fast, and I've grown up in that. And there's no weather, right? So it's perpetually 70 to 90 degrees. The weather doesn't stop you or slow you down from doing anything because it never rains. And what is snow, right? And so I'm coming out of this culture where everybody's just moving and going and going and going. And I come into this culture now in mid Ohio where there's these things called seasons, and they really do a lot to define and sort of dictate the rhythms of how people live. And so my tendency coming in was to say, hey, I want to do this and I want to build this and I want to go quick. And I was quickly faced with just this idea that says, hey, that is not the way, that is not the rhythm that has been kind of cultivated in this town. You know, rhythms are dictated by seasons. You have to respect that. It's also a great opportunity to allow your rhythms to be set more in the way that we see Christ kind of doing his rhythms in the Gospels. And so for a small town setting, it's people can be suspicious by people coming in going way too fast, which is a huge advantage because as a pastor, it forces me to slow down. And I also realized then that the expectation of people toward me, especially if I'm their pastor, is not to go fast. Is to sort of look at life as not a way that we can accomplish everything as quickly as possible, but as a way to step back and see what God is doing and to, you know, kind of step in and be a part of that. And knowing that, hey, what are we in a rush for? And why are we ask those questions. Why are we hurrying? And what is it about patience that feels so terrible to me? And so again, I'm talking all over the place, but a lot of these things surface when you kind of consider like these questions of quickness and fastness and wanting to get stuff done. And, we need to ask ourselves the question, why is that? And why are we so prone towards that, I think,
Yeah, I love that. And it's a lot to kind of wrestle with and process through because again, we tend to have this idea and well, let's just name it. Like the church culture tends to make us feel like we need to be growing, what we're measuring, numbers, budget, buildings, whatever it is, like that all has to really, really be developing and growing in order for us to be, effective. Like that's kind of the measurement. Like, okay, are you doing a good job as a pastor? Then, there should be more people in your church this year than there were last year, and the next year there should be even a greater percentage more. Like there's this whole kind of mindset that I think church culture has even created here in the U.S. So Ronnie, how do you manage that tension between those expectations, even, and I love what you said, Ronnie, it's not necessarily the expectations of even the people that, God has entrusted you to shepherd in your church. They may not have those expectations, but oftentimes we feel those expectations from outside even. So how do you manage that kind of tension with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, we're very driven by metrics and, as a culture, and we're very driven by show me the effect of the work,
Right.
And I think I just think if we look at our limitations and we embrace limitations, if we see the way in which the Lord operated, on earth in his ministry, we will begin to beautifully redefine what we consider to be greatness, what we consider to be a metric that's a worthy metric for us, not just a worldly metric or a more corporate metric, but we begin to see that the Lord has something for us as leaders or ministry leaders or pastors or whatever it is that we're doing, but he has something for us that is ultimately going to be about our flourishing, even our self-care, even the kind of ways that we need to pause and see, hey, this pace that I'm running, what's motivating that? What am I, what is, what's motivating this compulsion that I have to build and to grow, like what you just mentioned. And if we really take scripture seriously and we really step back and we allow ourselves to look at what we're doing honestly, to maybe repent of some of these things that we're doing out of a motivation to do something big and something famous and something noticeable, I think the Spirit will work in us in such a way where he reframes what we see as being valuable and important, which is the sanctification of our people and ourselves, which is never going to be a quick thing. It's
Mm.
just not quick. It wasn't designed to be quick, and God doesn't move quick, as we see, and sometimes he does works that appear to be quick.
Right.
And what I like to do when we see that is go, well, hold on, can we back up, or can we hear the story of the person of whom we think this has been quick? Because if you go back far enough, what you're going to see is this whole process that got them to this place of where we finally see something that's visible, but we don't see all the invisible work that happened up to that point. So I think it's the things that are unseen. Scripture tells us over and over again, those are the things worth pursuing, but they're just not the things that anybody sees right now, today, or quickly. And we just struggle with that. I struggle with that because I want you, Jason, I want you to be able to look at my ministry and what I'm doing, and I want you to see results. And I want you to be able to say, that Ronnie Martin guy, man, he must know what he's doing because look at those results. That's the wrong metric. It's the wrong motivation, but we get trapped in that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And Ronnie, as you're talking about those metrics, and maybe you can just share from your own personal journey, how how have those metrics shifted? Specifically, like the things that earlier in your ministry, you're like, these are the things that I'm really focusing on. How's that shifted to what are the things that you're really focusing on now? What does that look like in your local church ministry?
Yeah, I think so. Some of this is disposition, and so I happen to be somebody, I love to start new things. And so what's fun for me is being like, the leader who has the vision, who says, hey, what if we did this? Or what if we built this? Nothing wrong with that, right? But I think that I probably swapped that out for being more pastoral in a way that just kind of got down into the dirt with people. And so what I quickly found after even a few years of being the guy that, maybe could start things and inspire people and build things, it's like, well, at some point, like if you get on that Ferris wheel and it just keeps spinning and spinning, we look around and it's like, well, okay, you've built a bunch of pretty things, or you've created a bunch of things that look good to the people that are coming in, but like foundationally, like, is there still dirt floor in the
Mm.
church, right? It's like, have you actually built a foundation, or have you just built a really attractive shell? And I think not very far into it, I realized, no, I'm somebody who I like attractive shells, and I need to definitely refocus, on what kind of foundation it is that we're built. Like, what does the gospel look like to somebody when they step into our church? Is that the foundation that they're seeing? It can be the foundation that we are saying we have, but are they actually stepping on that gospel foundation, or is it still a dirt floor there? And the Lord convicted me of that, I think, after the first couple of years. And so the conversations just started changing, between myself and our team, and all of that. And I still have those tendencies because I like pretty things and I like to build things. God's given me something for that. Again, it's not bad, but I think it has to be done. Going back to your original point, it has to be done at a pace so that we are building on a foundation that is receiving the majority of our emphasis,
Mm.
right? And so I think maybe that's one way things have shifted a little bit.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful, Ronnie, because it's kind of like that foundation, that infrastructure.
Yeah.
If you are running out there and you're creating the new ideas, the new things, and you're engaging people in new ways, and yes, that feels fresh and like you said, I mean that's exciting. Even for the people there, it's like, oh, these are some exciting things. But if you don't have that infrastructure, then things can just kind of crumble in upon itself. Whereas
Yeah.
if you have that strong foundation, that infrastructure, and that, as you've said, takes time because it's not just theories or ideas or programs or whatever it's people. And that's one of the things that really stood out to me in the book, Ronnie, is you made a comment about this idea of patience and slowness as an advantage, which I loved, because oftentimes we think of something slow, it's a disadvantage or something wrong with it. But you talked about it as an advantage because it helps us stop looking at people just as projects, right? Can you talk to us a little bit about kind of that sentiment and that heart shift even that takes place as we slow the pace of our ministry and begin looking at people in a healthier, probably more Christ-like way, right?
Yeah, that's a really, I'm glad you brought that up, and it's really convicting for me because I would tell you, like a lot of pastors would, I look, I don't feel like I'm using people. I care about the people God has put in our church and put in my sphere of influence. But at the same time, I think inadvertently, if you're not careful, people can just be a means to an end, right? Because if you're just building a structure, right, so that you have, if you're more worried about the structure of just, hey, what's the building looking like that we're coming into? What's the programming look like that you're coming into? What's the Sunday service look like that you're coming into? The problem with church ministry is you hit a point, especially after church planting, where those things are able to come into full view, and now you have the staff and the deacons and the volunteer staff to sort of concentrate on working on those things. And I think if you're not careful, it can come at the cost of the people that are coming into those things. So what you're doing is you're trying to maintain this, like you just said, you're trying to maintain a structure, when at the end of the day, like the structure of the church are the people that make up the church, that God is sanctifying, God is growing, through the work of the Spirit. And I just think even without knowing it, just the sin that exists inside of us and the ambitions that exist inside of us, or at least for me, you can flip that narrative. Pretty soon people are a means to an end, and you don't even realize you're doing it. And you have something that needs to be repented of.
Yeah, that's good. And so as we slow down, God kind of can open our eyes up more to the person in front of us, as opposed to, this grand plan that we hope to, build within our town, right? Like,
Yeah, no, for sure.
It's on the personal level. Talk to us a little bit about the way that your church specifically, it's in a small town, as you've mentioned. How are you kind of intentionally slowing down, and what are some of the things that you're doing to engage at a grittier level? You talked about kind of getting in the dirt a little bit with people, because you said, sanctification, that's not something that happens overnight, what I mean? And we understand that, even though oftentimes we operate differently. But what are some things that you guys are encountering, Ronnie, that you're seeing this kind of gritty, kind of getting our hands dirty a little bit, working with people in your community?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I think, one of the biggest things that happened to everybody with the pandemic. So the pandemic, it did slow a lot of people. It slowed everybody down.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was interesting that the way we responded, especially in the beginning, to that slowdown was, what can we do behind the scenes to speed everything up? Because the worst thing in the world is that we're being slowed down. And I always just visualized, in the background, the Lord, even a year before the pandemic, just kind of, up, at the throne of grace, saying, you know what I think I'm going to do? I think I'm going to do a pandemic to slow the church down a little bit, and it's going to be crazy because they're going to fight it, and they're going to even when I shut everything down, they're going to want to try to go as fast as they can. And so the pandemic, I think, it was one of those things that by default it slowed us down. And I think what it did was it allowed me, and I think especially some of the responses that we had, we lost church members like everybody did, for all kinds of different reasons, like everybody did. And I think it caused me to step back and just say, okay, I'm sensing that we are not growing as deeply in some things as I had hoped up to this time. It's really humbling moment,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so what happened as the result of that was it was saying, hey, what are we doing in terms of how we're discipling our people? And we're a very simple model church. So our whole model was, hey, we have Sunday gatherings, we have midweek community groups. We want to keep it very simple like that. And we expanded that because we wanted to offer more opportunities for people to connect with community as well as grow in their, in their biblical knowledge and to grow spiritually. So we've just created more opportunities for people to get deeper into the Word, more opportunities for them to connect with different communities within the church that they didn't have the availability to do before that. So it's all very simple stuff, but I think that it's part of that process saying, hey, let's start at ground zero and let's start a maturing process that maybe was lacking before because we were blinded, by our own sense of pace. And so I think God opened our eyes and humbled us deeply. And we're trying some new things right now, but it's been really difficult. It's been very difficult, but I think it's been encouraging because, you know, it, I think, I think when you have a team, kind of come together, look around at the church culture and is honest about what's going on, not defensive, and just says, Lord, what are you doing? What do you want us to do? And let's try some things and some slow things and see how you work through that. It also is something that I think has given us some peace that maybe we lacked before.
Yeah, that's awesome, Ronnie. It's interesting to hear stories of local churches and how kind of that slowdown and gave us kind of the opportunity to look around and say, okay, what really are we doing? Because
Mhm.
you're just doing it. We all know this.
Yeah.
It's week in, week out,
Yeah.
right? We're just churning and we're trying to honor God. We're being faithful. It's not taking shots at anyone, but whenever you have something come in that forces a slowdown, kind of gives you an opportunity to recalibrate and really
Mhm.
kind of rethink some things and
Yeah.
make some adjustments. Now,
Yeah.
Ronnie, you not only do you pastor in a small town, but you also help serve and encourage other pastors who are serving in small towns. And of course, you've done this through the book that you and Donnie wrote, Pastoring Small Towns, which is a great resource. And you have a whole chapter, by the way, of those of you watching along, on this idea of slowing down, this patience in your pace of ministry. But what are some of the things that you're doing, Ronnie, as you've kind of looked out across the landscape? Have you experienced things in your town there in Mid-Ohio that you are helping to encourage other pastors? What are some of those resources and that network and those types of things that you have available there?
Yeah, so I'm part of a network called Harbor Network. We're just a church planning network, and my role there is to do what you said, is to, we call it leader renewal. So it's caring for pastors. My wife is part of that team. She cares for our pastors' wives, and I think the big thing is when it comes, especially to what you're talking about, which is slowness and pacing. It's encouraging and reminding pastors, regardless of the context they're in. So we have quite a few small town, church pastors in our network. We have urban, suburban. It's a huge variety of different kinds of pastors in different contexts. But I think the same thing applies, which is, the Lord wants you to know your limitations. He wants you to slow down. He didn't create you to be God, right? He's what he's doing is he's making you more God-like. He's making you more Christ-like. But there is a pace that comes with that, right? And there is a way for us to move and to work and to pastor that we will experience flourishing. And it's a way that we go about our ministries with just a deep, deep hearted trust for the work that the Lord is doing, and reminding us that it is a work of the Lord. The Lord gives us work to do. It's good work, but at no time should we think that we're responsible for people's growth. We're responsible for people's salvation. We don't believe that. That's not our theology. That's not what the Bible teaches. And so I think a big thing for us is just to remember that we first are servants, and it's a good and godly thing for us to step back, take a look in the mirror, and really see, if we're running at a sustainable pace, and that the Lord wants us to run. He's created us to run at a sustainable pace, and that we shouldn't let people, we shouldn't let ourselves, kind of run in this false guilt narrative that says, no, 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 no. My job here is to convince nobody knows what a pastor does, but one day a week. So my job is to convince them that I'm the hardest, I'm the hardest worker that ever existed. It's like, well, that's a false premise, and that's not a good premise to live to live out our pastoral lives in. But you just would be surprised how many pastors they're running a pace to satisfy the perceptions of their people. Again, people that probably don't have that perception of them, but they're convinced they do, because again, we use more of a sort of a corporate minded mentality when it comes to the work of the pastor. And we just have to remember that that is just not what God has called us to do. He certainly hasn't called us to be slothful and lazy, but he certainly hasn't called us to overwork either. He wants us to, live an abundant life, and we need to constantly not just put that on the shelf and have it be something that's great to preach about or great to encourage our people in, but we need to seriously be considering how it is that we're living that out on a daily basis, and be very, I would say, very conscientious of that, and consistent with how we put that into practice.
Yeah, I love that. Just kind of real quickly as we're winding down, because and the reason I say real quickly, sorry, right, but I'm just thinking like this could be another hour-long conversation, but something you said just triggered this in my mind.
Yeah.
And what are some of those things in our lives as pastors and ministry leaders that might get us, might help us to pull back from that kind of that false sense of expectation, and help us in a healthy way? What are some practices, some different things that you've incorporated in your own life that when you and your wife are working with pastors and their spouses, those types of things that really kind of help us kind of slow down in a healthy way and get some good rhythm in our lives?
Yeah, I think a really simple one is just practicing a weekly Sabbath day or days, and I think part of that as well is allowing your people to understand what that looks like. So be very honest with your people. So a Sabbath day or Sabbath days, this is what it looks like to me. My phone is off, or it's in the drawer. My laptop stays closed. It's not a time for work. It's not a time for productive work, like in that sense. And this is why this is good for us. This is why this is a healthy thing for me, for my family. So I think I think a pastor that is taking their Sabbath seriously, and they have taught through it. They've brought their congregation, their leadership team, their elders, their deacons, whatever their structure is. When they've brought their team into that, and everybody has a very good sort of like working understanding of what that looks like, not just for the pastor, but for anybody that's within the church staffing context, which is that we have times where we put rest and renewals is just part of our daily rhythm. It's part of how we live out our weeks, and to have everybody on board with that, and to champion that, and to pray for that, and to see the biblical precedent for that. I just think it's so important, right? And it allows you then to develop a culture of rest and renewal in your church, to where nobody's saying things, like, well, we know you only work one day a week. It must be nice to have a day off. It must be nice to take a day off on Thursday and Friday because the rest of us have to work. It's like nobody's saying those things, because again, you're saying, hey, this role that we have is a unique role. It's a mentally taxing role. And here's some of the ways biblically that we address that, so that we can continue to pastor you guys in the years to come without kind of following all the Barna stats and burning
Right.
out within 5 years and then never getting back into ministry. and battling and struggling with all kinds of things just because we didn't take some simple, very trusting steps, to warn against that, and to make sure you guys know, none of these things should be a mystery. Your people should know exactly why you're taking a sabbatical every 5 or 7 years, why you take a Sabbath day once a week. I mean, none of that should be a mystery, So I would be about just being very open and honest about these things within your church context. Let people grow into that too. Help them understand, why it is that you put such a high priority on these things, and let them grow in that with you.
Yeah, that's so good, Ronnie. That's excellent stuff, brother. Man, I appreciate you making the time to hang out with us. Appreciate Pastoring Small Towns, the book that you and Donnie worked on, and the insight and wisdom that people can find there. If people want to connect with you, Ronnie, connect with some of the ministry organizations, your church, those types of things, what's the best way that they can do that?
Yeah, so you can go to ronniemartin.org. That's his personal website, and you can find contact info there. You can go to substance-church.org. That has all my email info on there. Catch me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I mean, there's a million ways to get a hold of me.
Right.
So I'd love to hear from you. Love to chat. Love to dialogue about anything that you might be facing in your context, whatever it is. And it'd be a joy to hear from you. So yeah.
Awesome, Ronnie. I appreciate that. For those of you watching, listening along, we will have links to not only Ronnie and Donnie's book, Pastoring Small Towns, but also to Ronnie's website, to those different things that he mentioned. You can find all that in the toolkit for this episode at pastorserve.org/network. So you make sure you can reach out to him and dig more deeply into this incredible conversation we just had. Brother, thank you so much for making time again to hang out with us here on FrontStage BackStage. Thank you for all that you're doing, all you're putting out there, just your heart not only for your local church, which is so evident, but your heart for brothers and sisters serving on the front lines, and the encouragement that you're providing to so many other pastors. So we certainly appreciate the great work you're doing.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate you so much. Thank you.
All right. God bless you, brother. Now, before you go, I want to remind you of an incredible free resource that our team puts together every single week to help you and your team dig more deeply and maximize the conversation that we just had. This is the weekly toolkit that we provide, and we understand that it's one thing to listen or watch an episode, but it's something entirely different to actually take what you've heard, what you've watched, what you've seen, and apply it to your life and to your ministry. You see, FrontStage BackStage is more than just a podcast or YouTube show about ministry leadership. We are a complete resource to help train you and your entire ministry team as you seek to grow and develop in life and ministry. Every single week, we provide a weekly toolkit, which has all types of tools in it to help you do just that. Now, you can find this at pastorserve.org/network. That's pastorserve.org/network. And there you'll find all of our shows, all of our episodes, and all of our weekly toolkits. Now, inside the toolkit are several tools, including video links and audio links for you to share with your team. There are resource links about different resources and tools that were mentioned in the conversation, several other tools, but the greatest thing is the Ministry Leaders Growth Guide. Our team pulls key insights and concepts from every conversation with our amazing guests. And then we also create engaging questions for you and your team to consider and process, providing space for you to reflect on how that episode's topic relates to your unique context at your local church, in your ministry, and in your life. Now, you can use these questions in your regular staff meetings to guide your conversation as you invest in the growth of your ministry leaders. You can find the weekly toolkit at pastorserve.org/network. We encourage you to check out that free resource. Until next time, I'm Jason Daye, encouraging you to love well, live well, and lead well. God bless.